If you want to read an advanced chapter or want to support the author of this novel, then you can support the author. Link in description.
Chapter 31, Promise and Food. A much longer chapter than usual to conclude this part. This chapter may not be as enjoyable. The next chapter should be more fun. Half an hour later, we saw Pepper arrive and look confused at the 4 talking animals gazing at the sky. She then glanced through the window and saw me and the girls hugging, giving us a bewildered and strange look. She entered the house and sat on the couch quietly, observing the 4 outside. Should I ask? She looked at me helplessly. Ugh, if you don't mind me adopting a raccoon as our child, then maybe, I asked, not so subtly probing. Okay, I'm nervous about the response. I'm technically the head of this family, but the girls are the bosses of the boss. Now it was Pepper and Carol's turn to be surprised. Do you want to adopt a raccoon as our child, Tony? Carol and Pepper asked in unison, surprised. Yao just looked at us amused, then turned her gaze and looked affectionately at Rocket. Don't judge him by his appearance. He's more special than you can imagine. Yao spoke in a wise tone without taking her eyes off Rocket. I then used my extremis to quickly tell them the whole story, through memory sending, from my arrival on Counter-Earth to the stories I told Rocket and the other 3. Tony, how do you know these things? Did Yao tell you? Pepper asked, looking seriously at me. Just like Carol, she has her doubts about some of my actions. No, I didn't say anything. Yao shook her head and looked at me with a smile. Tattletale. Tony, since when have you known the future? Pepper asked, bewildered. Well, since I was 7 years old. One day, out of nowhere, I received a flood of memories about a future in which I'm a part of. I admitted. There's no real need to talk about my past life. Now I am Tony Stark, and I am happy with who I have become. But I still have to give some information, even if it's altered. The girls didn't doubt it. This is the first and last time I tell a lie to them, even though it's not a complete lie. So you knew about me all along. No wonder you found me so suddenly. Pepper looked shocked. Well, if I knew there was a perfect woman out there for me, why wouldn't I go after her? I looked seriously at Pepper, and I saw that just that sentence relieved many insecurities that were beginning to sprout in Pepper's heart. I know her. Pepper often overthinks things, but she's also strong and as stubborn as I am sometimes, so she won't give up on such a little thing. But it's better to assure her that I love her anyway. Do you know who gave you this knowledge? It was Carol's turn to ask, shifting the focus back to the point. Carol is different. She doesn't pay as much attention to details, often going straight to the heart of the matter. No, and, honestly, I don't want to know. Whatever the reason I received these memories, I can only be thankful. With these memories, I can prevent the tragic future of many people, including my own. I said with a serious tone. I meant every word. Whether it's my Tony Stark self or my pre-reincarnation self, we can only be grateful for the opportunity we had. If the original Tony had the chance to change his life from a young age and do everything he couldn't, he wouldn't hesitate for a second. I may be different from him, but he is also part of what gave rise to my current self, and I know we are both happy with our new path. A tragic future? What are you talking about, Tony? Pepper asked in shock. I had only passed on to her my memories of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, it's better if you see it, I said and passed my memories of the events up to Endgame to them through the extremis. No. Pepper and Carol shouted when they saw the scene of the finger snap and my death. Yao already knew since she saw the future, but even so, I saw her clenching her fists. Well, as tragic as their reactions are, it still warms my heart to see them so worried about me. Then they jumped on me and hugged me tightly. You will never, under any circumstances, make such a sacrifice. Pepper practically growled at me and made me promise. Carol was also nodding vigorously. Yao was by my side, staring at me with dagger eyes. I smiled wryly and asked, even if the universe is destroyed? Yes, all 3 of them said together. Hey, Yao, you got your role wrong? Love. It changes people's focus. I'm willing to trade half of the universe's life for yours. Your value is greater to the universe. Yao replied, shattering my illusions. I looked at her and saw her smiling mischievously. I could only smile wryly at her. After that, the girls made me promise. Okay, I promise that as long as you are not in danger, I will never make such a sacrifice. I promised with a serious tone. They tried to make me promise that even if they were in danger, I wouldn't do it. But they could never make me promise that. After calling me stubborn, they gave up. After we calmed down, we went back to normal conversation. That Tony is quite different from you, Pepper said, looking at me curiously. She was referring to Tony from memory. Yes, it seems he took all your sympathy, sold it, and bought 10 times your stubbornness. Carol said playfully as she laid her head on my lap. Well, he's not that bad. And you have to admit he has style, I said with a smile as I started to stroke Carol's head. You say that because you resemble him when you talk to people you couldn't care less about, Yao said playfully as she conjured tea out of thin air. Well, I tend to be more Howard Stark when talking to people I couldn't care less about. But with family and people I care about, I'm more Maria Stark. We talked for a while longer and then returned to discussing the guys outside. Well, can I adopt Rocket? I asked, changing the subject. Ugh, okay, he's pitiful and cute. If you can convince him, we'll adopt him. But what about the others? Pepper agreed. Carol didn't object, and Yao just smiled at us. Well, that's up to them. I want to adopt Rocket as my son, but they can live with us even if I don't adopt them, I said seriously. But my eye twitched when I saw Yao looking at me mischievously. Okay, I have some nefarious plans for them. But since I want to adopt Rocket, I'll do everything to ensure my son has a happy ending. Just an hour after our conversation, Rocket and the others entered the house with uncertainty and discomfort. I could hear their stomachs growling from a distance. Rocket entered first, with the rest following behind. It seems Rocket is their spiritual leader. Come on, don't be afraid. I want to introduce you to some people, I said and called them to come closer. They slowly entered and looked at me uncomfortably. I had invited them to live with me, but it's impossible for them to feel comfortable so quickly in such a strange environment after everything they've been through. I knelt to them and gave them a disarming smile. These are my wives. That one is Pepper, that's Yao, and that's Carol, I said, pointing to each of the girls. Wives? What's a wife? Rocket looked at me confused. Yes, wives. You don't need to understand right now. Someday you will, I said with a slightly sweaty forehead. I'm not even a father yet, and I'm already receiving such difficult questions. If I tell him it's people who want to spend their lives together forever, he might start calling Tiefs his wife. Not that I have a problem with it, but it would be strange confusion. And I certainly won't talk about sex to a child, even if it's a raccoon. Fortunately, someone saved me because Rocket still had that I want to learn more look on his face. Come on, you must be starving. And to my surprise, it was Yao who said that. They looked at me, and I nodded. That's when the four of them found something they liked as much as the sky, good food. So good? What is this? Rocket looked at me with innocent eyes. These are cheeseburgers. I smiled. He's just like his father. Me? Delicious? And these? He ate something else and looked at me with sparkling eyes again. These are nachos, I replied, with my chin resting on my hand, looking happily at him. So cute. Rocket then picked up something orange and ate it, then he froze. He looked at me with a strange and pitiful expression. PFFF? These are carrots. You don't have to eat them if you don't want to. I couldn't help but laugh at his lamentable face. I looked at the girls, and they were also looking at us amused. Carrot? Floor loves carrots now. Floor also ate and said cheerfully. Then she started stuffing her mouth with carrots. Well, I had to restore her body so she could enjoy the meal. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be able to eat with that metal mask on. Huh? Floor, you don't. I was going to say that as she is a rabbit, she shouldn't eat carrots as they would be bad for her. But looking at her pitiful look, I couldn't do it. Fortunately, she is a modified rabbit and also has extremis in her body now that I've fixed it, so there won't be any problem. She looked at me cutely with her head tilted, confused. It's nothing. I was just going to say that you should try other things too. Maybe you'll find something you like more than carrots. I smiled wryly at her and said. Impossible. Floor doesn't believe there's anything better than carrots. She said incredulously but still did as I said. That's how the four of them ate until their stomachs were almost bursting. Chapter 32, The Eyes. The auxiliary chapter has been changed. Rocket P.O.V. Today many things happened all at once. If we divide my day in two, then the first part was horrible, and I hoped it wasn't true. While the second part, I hoped it wasn't just a dream. The High Evolutionary had been lying all along, and I almost lost my friends today. But in return, I think I found a new home. Home was in those eyes, so caring, so patient. As the day went on, I noticed it wasn't just that man's eyes, the wives around him also looked at me like that and at my friends, especially at me, but I didn't understand why. Rocket, there's something I want to tell you, the man said, looking at me. I murmured softly and looked at him anxiously. Please don't send us away. Please don't send us away. Those were my only thoughts. Looking out of the corner of my eye at my friends, I think they're as nervous as I am. Floor was trembling. Lila tried to stay calm, but I saw anxiety in her eyes. Well, actually, I feel a special connection with you, Rocket. I have this knowledge of the future, and I can draw certain conclusions. Besides how pitiful you are, I really think you're amazing, and I feel a strong affinity with you, he said, looking at me seriously. I couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. It doesn't seem like he's kicking us out. In fact, he's praising me? Well, it might be a bit abrupt, but it's better to say it straight away. Rocket, would you like to be adopted as my son? Not just because you're cute, pitiful, and a genius, but I really feel an affinity with you, he said, looking at me. I widened my eyes, startled by his words. I never expected this. My mind was a mess, but he didn't even let me think properly and continued. Look, Rocket, I can't judge you by your future self, because you haven't been through that. But I can still draw certain conclusions, he said as he stood up, knelt beside me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. You're strong, even with extreme pain, you fought and survived. Even when the world dealt you a bad hand, you still saved it and saved countless people. And no matter how bad your mouth was, you value more than your life those you call friends and family. I just want you to give me a chance to give you a happy life and family that you deserve. He said all of that in one breath. My heart stopped at that moment. I've never felt so cared for, trusted, and loved. It was a warmth different from what being with my friends Lila, Floor, and Tiefs gave me. It was something I could only put into one word. Family. Rocket, what do you think? I'm sorry, I'm being a bit abrupt. You don't even know me well. I just hope you'll think. He continued, but in my excitement, I interrupted him. I want to. I said with a jump, but then I realized I was abrupt. I then explained softly, almost inaudibly, I also felt an affinity with you, and I feel comfortable and safe. I would like to be your son. He smiled upon hearing that and pulled me into a hug. From now on, your name will be Rocket Raccoon Stark. When you're ready, call me Daddy. He kissed the top of my head with a smile. Him doing that gave me a different feeling, but a good different feeling. I think I'll get used to this, I thought with a smile on my lips as I buried myself in my new father's embrace. Images to heal the soul here. Tony Stark P.O.V. A month had passed since I rescued Rocket and the other three. At this moment, Rocket and I were in the workshop, working. What are we going to do, Dad? Rocket asked from my arms. It's been a month since we've been together, and he calls me that naturally now, but it never fails to put a happy smile on my face. So cute. Well, you and Lila are doing fine, but Teefs and Floor have trouble doing many things on their own, so we've come to work on a solution today. I smiled at him. Knowing that we're here to help his friends made his eyes sparkle. Officially, I adopted Rocket, but I'm taking care of the other three kids with equal amounts of affection. Okay, I have difficulty being affectionate with Teefs due to his size and appearance, so the main reason we're here today is for him. But I can't say that out loud to avoid making the little ones sad. This is one of my backburner projects, but since it didn't have much utility, I put it off. I have a lot to work on, so it sat on hold until today. I explained and looked at Rocket, who was listening attentively. Jarvis, bring the scroll cells and blood we collected. I ordered as I took Rocket out of my arms and sat him on the workbench. Oh, you still remember that? I was wondering if I should throw it away. Jarvis replied sarcastically. Was he really going to throw it away? Rocket looked at me confused. I smiled and ruffled the fur on his head. Nah, he's just kidding. It gets a bit lonely working alone, so I made Jarvis to be both my work companion and my friend. I said to him with a smile. Young master, don't worry. Jarvis confirmed as well. Ugh, Jarvis, I feel like you're cursing my son by calling him that. I said with my eye twitching. Please, stop reading Chinese fantasy novels, sir. Jarvis advised me with a strange tone. I shook my head playfully and looked at Rocket, who was looking at me perplexed. Jarvis, show Rocket and me the information you've collected. I ordered. Instantly, a lot of data and schematics appeared in holograms in front of us. Affirmative, sir. According to my analysis, Skrull bodies are not based on carbon like humans but on a material not found on the periodic table. Among their most special intrinsic abilities, there is metamorphosis and reading recent memories, Jarvis explained succinctly. But, I asked what Jarvis was waiting for. Their metamorphosis is limited in size, unable to increase or decrease their body mass drastically, their DNA also cannot copy special abilities, and finally, their transformations require a certain amount of stamina to be maintained. Jarvis said. I looked at Rocket, who was looking at me with bright eyes and smiled. Can you predict our goal, kid? I asked, smiling. Adapt this Skrull DNA for us to use and change Floor and Teef's body shape. He asked me with puppy dog eyes. Exactly, but since we'll be at it, we won't do a half-hearted job. We should eliminate their weaknesses. Actually, it's more about adapting the weaknesses to our benefit, but you'll see. I said and began manipulating the holograms. The extremist developed by me solves the stamina problem, as it can keep our bodies in a state of perfection unless we don't want that. As for the size, I have two solutions that can be used together. The first is the PIM particles. I then explained the PIM particles to Rocket. Wow, amazing. Did you create these particles, Dad? Rocket asked. No. I looked at Rocket with a serious face, and he started getting anxious with my serious look. Then I smiled. I stole them. Rocket widened his eyes at me in shock. PFFFF? Ha ha ha. He then laughed and burst into laughter. Haha, Dad is amazing. He only stopped laughing for a moment to say that to me with bright eyes. I just smiled and continued manipulating the hologram. That way, we spent a month working on the Skrull DNA. Omniscient narrator's POV. Amidst the voids of the universes, an ancient and wise voice echoed across realities. At first, I scoured eternity for one true hero. And finally, I believe I found the one. A hero unlike anything I've ever seen before. The voice said with joy. Bright eyes like headlights looked from the void at Tony and Rocket, who were playing and smiling while applying the newly developed Skrull serum to themselves. But then its voice was filled with concern. But in this time of distress, I can only risk losing this hero and this story because he is my only hope of not losing all the others. The voice then spoke its final sentence as its voice echoed through the universe. The multiverse, every single world, every story is my home, and I will protect it to the end. I am the Watcher. Chapter 33, You have been chosen. Apologies for the delay of the chapter. This chapter features a song, but it's not necessary to listen to it. Wait for Tony to ask Jarvis to play it. Song, The Clash, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Among the voids of the universes, an ancient and wise voice echoed through the realities. Time, space, reality. It's more than a linear path. It's a prism of endless possibility, where a single choice can branch out into infinite realities, creating alternate worlds from the ones you know. I am the Watcher. I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question. What if? The owner of the bright eyes that scrutinized all of reality spoke his mantra with confidence and power. But then he looked to the sides and down. Not good. he said in an anxious tone and continued, Ultron has called for reinforcements. Ueta, the Watcher, gazed across the planes of existence and observed Ultron, wielding the 6 Infinity Stones, encountering another Ultron. Ultron with the 6 stones glanced out of the corner of his eye directly at Ueta and gave a malicious smile. Ah! Ueta shouted in alarm and waved his hand, dispersing both Ultron from seeing him and him from seeing Ultron. No, 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 this shouldn't happen. If 2 Ultrons are wielding 2 sets of stones, there will be no hope for other universes to fight against them. Ueta said with anxiety and fear. A shadow emerged from the darkness and approached Ueta. Various shapes emerged from the figure as if it were not a single being but a conglomeration. I'm out of options. That thing left me with no choice. Ueta said bitterly as he turned to face the creature. Ready to break your oath. The figure that emerged from the shadow shed its monstrous form and revealed itself to be Stephen Strange, who was smiling at Ueta. Do you really want me to say it? Ueta looked helplessly at Strange as he stood up. Oh, yeah, I wanna hear you say it. Strange said playfully, looking at Ueta. Ueta looked at the ground and sighed, but soon his eyes were filled with determination. Okay, I can't believe I'm about to say this. I see now, I need your help. Ueta looked at Strange with determination. Well, what do we do? Strange asked. Ultron has become too powerful. Even I am not his match. We need a team. Ueta looked at Strange, who looked at him in surprise. Captain Carter, the soldier lost in time, you have been chosen. Ueta pointed at Captain Carter from an alternate reality and spoke to her. Carter looked in surprise at the giant in the sky. Star-Lord T'Challa, leader of the Ravagers and lost prince of Wakanda, you have been chosen. Gamera, survivor of Sakaar and destroyer of Thanos, Ueta was saying but was interrupted. And one who's about to kick your moon-shaped, ugly mug. Tony Stark from another dimension interrupted, menacingly. Ueta looked at Tony and said without emotion, Stark, as arrogant as ever, I see. But it's not you. You, Gamera, have been chosen. In a Wakanda filled with smoke and destruction, the Black Panther gazed through the broken throne room window at the smoke and military helicopters flying outside. Eric Stevens, Killmonger, Tony Stark's former protege and killer, you have been chosen. Thor Odinson, Crown Prince of Ueta tried to summon Thor, who was fighting Ultron robots, but Thor didn't pay attention, continuously hammering and shouting and you with each strike. You've been Ueta tried to continue but was repeatedly interrupted. Have at you, too, and you, and you. Thor hammered the robots without paying attention. Thor, Ueta called. And you, and you. Thor continued. SHH, calm down. Ueta grew frustrated and reached out to grab Thor and lift him. Thor Odinson, Crown Prince of Asgard. Ueta repeated. Ah! Thor screamed hysterically as he was suddenly lifted by a giant with an even larger head. You have been chosen. Ueta proclaimed. Jarvis, play should I stay or should I go by the Clash? Tony said as he took a sip of whiskey and manipulated holograms. Playing, Sir Jarvis replied. Darling, you've got to let me know. Should I stay or should I go? Tony glanced at the time. 1 a.m. He said aloud. Tony then narrowed his eyes and looked up. Didn't they tell you it's not polite to visit without calling first? Tony asked, looking at the enormous shadow that appeared in his garage. Tony Stark, true leader of the Iron Brotherhood, creator of the Seed, and the only Tony Stark cursed with knowledge but not with arrogance. Ueta looked at Tony with a special glint in his eyes but was interrupted. You forgot the most handsome, rich, and powerful man. But it's okay, I'll let it pass this time. Tony said seriously. Ueta froze for a moment. His eye twitched, and he corrected himself, slightly cursed with arrogance. It's not arrogance, it's facts. Tony shrugged. Sigh, you have been chosen. Ueta said, sounding tired. Sorry, I'm busy. But I'm rooting for you. I know you can do it. Tony shrugged and returned to his workbench. Ueta furrowed his brow and said, but you don't even know who I am or what problem we're facing. Well, one thing I got right, it's a problem, which quickly leads me to disinterest. Tony said without turning around. Ueta raised an eyebrow, confused. He's not acting like he normally would. I've observed him, and I know he wouldn't turn his back on problems without even knowing what they are. Then a light bulb went off in Ueta's mind. He looked at Tony and spoke slowly and wisely, you're afraid. Tony stopped his movements, put his hands on the table, and looked down. If a being like you comes to ask for my help, it means there's something you can't handle on your own. Look, man, I have a happy family, a happy life, and I can't and won't risk all of that just to jump into something with a high likelihood of going very wrong. Tony turned to face Ueta. Ueta widened his eyes, surprised. He looked at Tony for a bit longer and began to turn to leave. Wait. A shout echoed, preventing Ueta from leaving and causing Tony to raise his head. A yellow portal appeared in the garage, and a beautiful blonde woman appeared. Tony, we have to go. If we don't, they won't win. The woman said determinedly. You're. Yao. Ueta looked surprised at the woman. The woman nodded, and her appearance changed to that of a bald woman. She also injected the newly created Skrull serum. She then looked at Tony and said, Tony, if we don't go, there won't be a future. They will strengthen themselves through the massacre of universes, and in less than a year, they will come here. Yao said seriously. But what if we go now? Tony asked. Then it's going to be fun. Yao smiled at Tony. Tony raised an eyebrow and then smiled. Let's do this. Chapter 34, Incursions. Things will really happen in the next chapter. This one is more about explaining things, as I've seen that several people haven't seen What If. Thor screamed hysterically with his eyes closed, then suddenly stopped when he opened his eyes. We're in a pub, Thor said with a relieved and happy tone. Captain Carter, who was next to Thor, looked around and said in surprise, I know this place. An old and soft song played in the pub. Captain looked to the side and saw a portrait on the wall of a frail Steve Rogers, which brought a smile to her face. Suddenly, a voice came from behind the bar counter. The pub facade was my idea. I read about it in your biography. I hope you like it. A friendly and polite Dr. Strange explained. But shortly after he said that, someone who wasn't giving it much thought called him. Over here. Me. Can I get a beer? It was the alternative Thor, the party prince, who asked with a smile. Strange instantly pulled a beer mug from under the counter and handed it to Thor. Yes, Thor said happily and placed a Sentinel Ultron's head, which he was carrying from the battle he was having before being summoned by Uatu, on the counter without caring. Who are you? Peggy just shook her head at Thor and looked at Strange, questioning. Where am I? Gamera also inquired. Why did you bring us here? What do you want with us? T'Challa also asked his question. Meanwhile, Killmonger was looking at the vibranium-made Ultron Sentinel head that Thor had placed on the table. All good questions. Strange shrugged at all the questions. It wasn't him who was going to explain. Send me back. Now, Gamera demanded, crossing her arms, unhappy. At this moment, the pub lights were flashing continuously. Suddenly, a presence revealed itself in their midst. It's you again. Carter exclaimed, looking at Uatu. Come on. Get a new trick, man. T'Challa complained about Uatu's appearance. Uatu looked at them and began to explain. You have been chosen, for a mission that is both highly dangerous and absolutely necessary for the continuation of life as you know it. At first, I scoured eternity for one true hero, and I finally found him. Uatu explained seriously. But before he could be interrupted, he continued. Unfortunately, he hasn't had time to grow up yet. But now I have to see the bigger picture. This mission requires a team. The perfect combination of skills and experience that alone will triumph. Uatu explained, looking into each of their eyes. Let me get this straight. Captain Carter took a step forward and said with an unhappy expression, you kidnapped us from across the galaxy so we could, what? Save the universe. Gamera added, looking unhappily at Uatu. Not exactly. Bit more complicated than that? Uatu shook his head, not intimidated by the looks he was receiving. You aren't just our best hope to save one universe. Strange finally spoke up and assisted Uatu in clarifying. You are my last hope to save all of them. You are the guardians of the multiverse. Uatu proclaimed with solemnity and power. Gulp gulp asterisk. Swallowing sounds interrupted the solemnity of the moment. I know what this is. Loki put you up to this joke. Listen, I do not have time for his pranks today, Thor said with a playful smile after downing his beer. Thor casually threw the glass mug over his shoulder without caring that it shattered as it hit the floor and walked toward the door. No, I wouldn't do that. Strange tried to stop him from leaving the door. My Lady Jane needs me. So, I'll be going. Enjoy yours. Thor was sucked in and started screaming while holding on to the door for dear life, trying to avoid being swallowed by the swirling energy vortex outside the door. Quickly, he climbed back into the pub through the door and closed it. Ha ha ha, he panted rapidly against the door, hand on his chest. Carter ignored Thor and looked at Uatu, asking, we're in. Mind telling us what we're up against? Your worlds are either under attack or soon will be by Ultron, an artificial intelligence elevated to a cosmic being thanks to an enhanced synthetic body and the power of the Infinity Stones. Uatu explained. 6 stones of near unfathomable power, each controlling an essential aspect of our existence. And Ultron holds all of them, and is trying to be in possession of 2 pairs. Strange completed while using illusions to show demonstrations of the Infinity Stones. I have a question. A voice came out of nowhere, making everyone look at the bar counter, where a man in a technological metal suit was standing, mixing a drink. Stark. Gamera, Carter, and Strange exclaimed in surprise at the sight of the suit. Killmonger slightly widened his eyes upon hearing that name. He didn't know if it was the same man from his memory, but he still looked at the man in the suit with caution. I would have liked to be recognized just for the beauties in the room, but Strange ruined that. Tony said playfully as he picked up the drink he had prepared and poured it into the mask of the suit, emptied the glass. Everyone looked at Tony strangely as he poured the drink into the mask. However, they didn't know that the nanobots in the suit carried the liquid to Tony's mouth. Furthermore, they hadn't seen Tony before because he had been camouflaged since his arrival. Stark, you mentioned you had a question. Uatu redirected the conversation to the topic at hand. They couldn't afford to waste time. As far as I know, the stones from one universe don't work in another universe. How can Ultron use the stones in another universe? Tony asked as he stared at Uatu with his blue eyes of armor. There was silence in the room. No one knew about this characteristic of the Infinity Stones except for Tony and Uatu. Normally, that would be true. Uatu sighed and stared back at Tony. But Ultron isn't simply teleporting from one universe to another. He's opening a hole and passing from one universe to another, and through the hole, he can draw energy from one universe and use it in another, allowing him to continue operating the stones. Uatu explained, narrowing his eyes. Strange widened his eyes. Just as I exploited the connection between the dark dimension and Earth to use the time stone and create a time loop to bargain with Dormammu, Steven said with realization. Yes. Uatu confirmed, nodding. If it's that simple, why haven't other stone bearers done this? Tony sought clarification. Uatu looked at Tony and replied calmly, doing this using all 6 infinity stones creates incursions. Extremely powerful incursions, with a high likelihood of both or more connected worlds dying, and Ultron. He doesn't care if the worlds die, he just wants to destroy all life. On the contrary, incursions are good for his plans. Tony finished Uatu's sentence with narrowed eyes. Uatu nodded again and looked at everyone in the room, and said, Ultron has to be stopped. Chapter 35, The Speech. I thought I would be able to start the battle in this one, but there was a lot of talking ahead. I could skip it, but many would be left confused as they haven't seen the series What If. So, to wrap this up, this chapter is almost 2 chapters in length. The next one is really the battle. What's the plan? Peggy took the lead and asked. We believe the only way to stop Ultron is to separate his body from the stones. Doctor Strange revealed his and Uatu's idea. But this Ultron could be hiding anywhere in the multiverse. Carter asked helplessly. Yes. Uatu nodded in agreement. It's not as difficult as you all make it seem. A voice came out of nowhere, startling everyone, including Uatu and Strange, except Tony. Huh? Ancient One. Strange exclaimed, surprised. How did you come here? Uatu looked surprised at the bald woman who appeared out of thin air. I took advantage of the ride you gave to my husband. You were too preoccupied with things to notice. Yao said playfully as she walked to Tony's side with her hands behind her back. Husband. Strange exclaimed once again with widened eyes. Impossible. Strange and Uatu exclaimed, surprised. Uatu exclaimed because he couldn't believe he didn't sense Yao following, while Strange did because he saw Yao arrive by Stark's side and gently take his hand in hers. Yao smiled at the two and said, we're involved with the multiverse. It would be wise to avoid the use of that word. What did you mean by it's not as difficult? Gamera ignored their reactions and asked the unknown bald woman. She even ignored Strange's slack jaw and bulging eyes. Ultron is tethered to your universe through the stones and the rift he made to cross over other universes. Any display of a large amount of mystical energy will attract his attention. Yao revealed. Makes sense. Strange slightly regained his senses and agreed. Yao looked at Strange and nodded slightly. You've become powerful, Steven. But brute force isn't always better than subtlety. In your pursuit of greater power, you've forgotten what's essential for a sorcerer. Yao looked into Strange's eyes. Strange raised his head and looked surprised at Yao. What is essential for a sorcerer? Steven murmured to himself in doubt. Knowledge and learning. Yao replied with a smile. Steven widened his eyes upon hearing that. Gulp gulp asterisk burp. Thor ignored the conversation as he drank and burped. Is the boring talk over? Excuse me, yeah. Is there a universe of Chinese food that has alternate dimension delivery? Tummy's getting rumbly haha. Thor said with a smile and laughed at the end. Everyone looked at Thor helplessly. Tony Stark P.O.V. We were all sitting, eating Chinese food that Uatu took one of us back to his dimension to get. Unfortunately, Uatu doesn't know any dimensional delivery service, but it makes sense. After all, traversing universes isn't an easy task, let alone just for delivering Chinese food. While eating, we discussed the plan. So we have to face a crazy robot wielding the power of a universe in the form of stones. Carter sought clarification. Yes. Uatu agreed. Behind an army of killer robots. T'Challa asked, shaking his head helplessly. Afraid so. Uatu nodded once again. And not just one robot, but 2, who are wielding 2 sets of stones. She's got a point. Strange said to Uatu. I never said it would be easy. Uatu said, looking at Strange, helpless. This is a suicide mission. Killmonger said with a frown. If we don't fight now, we'll die anyway shortly after. It was finally me who spoke, shrugging. What I said seemed to wake them up. There was no choice, either we did this, or we and everything we loved would be destroyed. Everyone fell silent. Then they looked into each other's eyes and agreed. Well, obviously the first step would be finding him. T'Challa took the lead and said. Well, I'm not one to brag. Thor joined the conversation and said with a smile as he threw the hammer up and caught it, but I've been told that I excel at attracting unwanted attention. As he finished speaking, the hammer that had fallen into his hand discharged a surge of electricity and blasted a beam of lightning at the chandelier. We've got our bait, I said, smiling playfully. Thor didn't mind being called bait and continued laughing carelessly. And after we recover the stones, we destroy them. This time it was Gamera contributing to the plan. How would you even go about destroying the... Thor began to speak but stopped when he saw Gamera picking up a metal contraption. Oh, you're answering my question. Sorry. Thank you. Gamera smiled and ignored him. The Infinity Crusher, designed to disintegrate each stone into nothing. Gamera explained as everyone crowded to look at the machine. Yep. That's the team I assembled. Uatu spoke to Strange with amusement and confidence. I was about to say that the crusher might be useless, but Yao held me by the arm and smiled at me. I widened my eyes slightly and looked amusedly at Yao. Yao was simply telling me to let it happen, that it would be more beneficial for us. Yao couldn't see what happened in other universes with her time stone, but she could see what happened in our universe. So as long as we returned to our universe in the future and talked about it, Yao could see and hear in the past our future selves. That way, she could still foresee countless possibilities and maximize our profit. After establishing the plan, we discussed the details a little more and decided to set out. Alright, folks, you all know what to do. You know the plan. Stark and Yao will handle one of the Ultrons. The rest of us are responsible for the other Ultron. Let's get the Soul Stone and bring it to Gamera. We'll hold him off, and then she'll unleash the Crusher. With a little luck, we'll be home for dinner. Carter summarized the plan in an optimistic and heroic atmosphere. But as always, someone interrupted the mood. And that someone, as always, was Thor. Okay, wait. Slow down a little bit. There's a few people in the room that don't understand. Not me. I get it. But for them, maybe repeat it. Thor interrupted and said with a confident smile, but his stupidity was evident to everyone. You're ready. Good luck, my friends. Yueta said, giving us a confident look, completely ignoring Thor. Yueta then waved his hand and we were all sucked into a portal and appeared on a cliff. We looked around, but everything was dead. There was no sign of life. This place is safe? Gamera asked. Apparently, there's not enough intelligent life here to attract Ultron. Until we decide to. Strange, who was performing some spells, said after diagnosing the surroundings. Then suddenly he doubled over in pain. Ugh. Strange held his wrist in pain and his hand transformed into grotesque tentacles, but soon returned to normal. We all looked at him in surprise. Can I ask, what happened? Carter asked with a concerned look. Strange sighed bitterly, then straightened up and looked at Peggy and said with a sad smile, same thing that happened to you, love. Carter gave a soft smile and asked, I take it you know the Captain Carter in your universe? No, Captain America. In my universe, Steve Rogers received the serum. Strange gently explained with a smile at the corner of his lips. Peggy looked at him surprised and smiled upon hearing that. Now, that would be a sight to see. Peggy said softly with a smile. Separated from them, Killmonger was exploring the head of the Ultron Sentinel that Thor had brought. Gamera was further away, with me, Yao, and Thor. She was looking with narrowed eyes at Killmonger. Do you trust him? She asked us. Nope. I said with a smile. Not at all. Yao added. I trust everyone. Thor said, smiling proudly in his stupidity. Thor then approached the fire and proclaimed haughtily, hasten, friends. Tonight we feast. For tomorrow, we fight. Thor said solemnly and raised the hammer. Small bolts of lightning circled his hand and hammer. In that spirit, I propose a toast. Strange said playfully and summoned different types of drinks. We all gathered around him and got a drink. Some mead. Wonderful. Thor said happily. Oh, now we're talking. Gamera also said with a smile on her lips, taking her favorite drink. Seeing that everyone had a drink, Strange began to give a speech to boost everyone's confidence before the battle. A wise sorcerer once told me that to face death is part of the plan. To face death is to conquer one's greatest fear of the unknown, of a nothingless space, of the end of all ends, the senseless nothing and the vast opening of infinity to your. He began speaking non-stop things that didn't boost morale, and it was kind of obvious that he didn't even know what he was doing. Fortunately, he was interrupted by crimson bands of Sidorak circling his mouth, silencing him. Dr. Strange. Yao, who was responsible for the spell that silenced Strange, said with her eye twitching, please, do not distort my words of wisdom into meaningless ramblings. She said helplessly. Let me. You've done enough, Doctor. T'Challa came to reinforce Strange and embraced his shoulder. He then raised his glass and proclaimed, to the Guardians of the Multiverse. Everyone completed, raising their glasses. Muffled Strange also said and raised his glass. Thor also got excited and drank all of his beer at once, threw the glass on the ground, and raised his hammer. The multiverse. Thor shouted and unleashed a massive storm of lightning into the sky. As soon as the lightning subsided, there was a brief silence before an immense hologram of Ultron appeared in the sky. His body was that of Vision coated in Ultron's armor. In his chest, he had 5 Infinity Stones, and the 6th was on his forehead. So there is life in this universe, after all. Ultron said with amusement as he looked at all of us. There goes waiting until we're ready. Strange said, shrugging helplessly. In my defense, I did warn you. I excel at attracting unwanted attention. Thor said, not caring in the slightest. Strange's cloak then drew everyone's attention when it patted Strange on the shoulder with its tip and then pointed to a spot in the sky. Where the cloak pointed, the sky was split, and from it emerged 2 imposing Ultrons, each wielding a spear. I, who had been quiet in my corner until now, finally stepped forward with a solemn face and said, well, showtime. Chapter 36, The Ultrons. The Ultron War chapters will be longer, including this one. Tony P.O.V. This Ultron isn't like the one the Avengers faced in the Age of Ultron. In this universe, unlike the original, Ultron didn't have the body he was using stolen and transformed into Vision. He managed to use the body he created for himself. Ultron, with Vision's powerful body, was able to defeat and kill all the Avengers, wipe out all life on Earth, and kill Thanos when he arrived with the Infinity Stones on Earth, then proceeded to extinguish all life in the universe. That's how we got the current Ultron. The second Ultron was the Ultron of that reality going to another universe and repeating the aforementioned events. That's how we have 2 overpowered Ultrons that are currently trying to kill us. Alright, here comes a non-compliant spell. Strange said seriously, making the rock and roll sign with both hands, bringing them together. Then he separated them, spreading spells on all of us. Golden circles appeared under the feet of all of us, with Strange in the center with a larger circle. Illusory golden armor pieces full of runes materialized on everyone's bodies. Ow, Thor exclaimed, taken aback by the magic. Yeah, you might feel it, Strange said playfully, observing Thor's reaction. Strange then conjured more spells and cast them on us, making the illusory armor a bit more real. Gamera grunted. T'Challa reacted, impressed. Oh, what is going on? Carter also expressed surprise with a smile. It's a protection spell. You're welcome, Strange explained with a complacent smile. You have far greater raw power than I, Steven, but you lack the technique. A soft voice interrupted Strange's boast. Strange looked surprised at Yao, who spoke. Open your eyes, Dr. Strange. Yao smiled and clasped her hands in front of her chest, performing spell patterns. She then crouched down and tapped the ground, causing a wave of golden light to spread and hit our armor. Our previously illusory armor condensed, becoming more real and solid, melding with our attire. What are we, gold saints? I joked, looking at my golden armor and that of everyone else. Image of Tony's enchanted armor. Then the armors vanished and everyone returned to normal, except for mine. The magical armor remains invisible, but it's still there. When damage is inflicted, it will appear. But as a wizard, I can keep the spell without it disappearing, and I like the new style for this fight. Wow, this is fantastic. Showtime. Watcher. Carter said, impressed at feeling protected and powerful. She then called Uatu to start the plan. As she said this, a portal created by Uatu appeared. We were actually on another planet, maybe even another universe, and the portal's destination was the original Earth of the first Ultron we are facing now. Gamera and Killmonger entered the portal to prepare the Infinity Crusher. See you on the flip side. Killmonger lowered his Black Panther mask and said before entering. All of this happened very quickly, and the Ultrons were taking their time as they descended from the sky slowly. Thor looked at Ultron in the sky and smiled. I know how to deal with this party pooper. Thor, the Prince of Parties, said with a grin as he approached the edge of the cliff we were on and, consequently, Ultron. Wait, Thor, the plan. Carter tried to interrupt Thor's foolishness. But Thor, as always, didn't listen to the others. Assuming a battle stance and energizing his hammer, Thor looked at the Ultrons and smiled. He raised the hammer aiming at them and let out his battle cry, Viva Las Vegas. Giant torrents of thunder flew and struck the Ultrons directly. Vegas. Thor continued to shout and shoot lightning. The Ultrons looked at each other with strange faces as the lightning didn't even tickle them. All of us also looked at Thor strangely, who continued to shout. One of the Ultrons simply reached out and crushed Thor's lightning as if it were nothing. Vegas SWAT. Thor stopped his cry and looked confused at the unscathed Ultrons. Can't say I've heard that battle cry before. One Ultron spoke, looking strangely at Thor. I feel like he's stupid even by human standards. The other Ultron said, shaking his head. He then activated his Infinity Stones and brought down the cliff we were on. Everyone fell along with the cliff. All too easy, the other Ultron said, shaking his head. But a voice interrupted them from leaving. Kids, are you trying to kill Daddy? Daddy will be upset, I said as I flew out of the fallen cliff and hovered in front of the two Ultrons. Oh, Tony. Seems like no matter the universe, you remain annoying. One of the Ultrons waved his hand and released a blast of energy with the stones in my direction. I opened a portal in front of me that swallowed the wave of energy and emerged behind the other Ultron, throwing him away. Where he landed, I saw a golden portal emerge, and from it came Strange, Carter, T'Challa, and Thor. So, this is your plan, to separate us. It's rather naive of you to think you can hold me alone. Ultron looked at me, amused. I tilted my head and asked, confused, huh? Who said I'm alone? Ultron narrowed his eyes, but before he could react, a blade-shaped hole emerged from his chest. Arg. Ultron turned and launched a blast of energy towards the one who had stabbed him, sending the invisible person who stabbed him flying away. The cut was right where the soul stone was, sending it flying forward, to where I was. I reached out and caught it firmly. Yao, who was responsible, had stabilized in the air after being thrown away. She was in her iron armor, floating with thrusters. She was forced to exit camouflage mode due to the attack. On her wrist, a metal blade was dissolving into nanobots and returning to her armor. Image of Yao's enchanted armor. This was our plan from the beginning, to remove one of Ultron's stones when he wasn't taking us seriously. And preferably the Soul Stone, being the most complicated and mysterious one. Additionally, the other team is also aiming for the Soul Stone, so there won't be a situation where Ultron switches stones and one of them gets the complete set. Insignificant ants. Why don't you just die quietly? Ultron was livid, holding his wound. Then the time stone in his abdomen glowed, and the injury returned to normal, but without the Soul Stone. How rude, didn't your father give you manners? Oh, I am your father, so probably not, I said provocatively. Arg. Ultron snarled and flew toward me. I activated my photon powers to power the armor and accelerated towards him. Boom. Strange P.O.V. I pushed the rocks off the cliff that had fallen on us. Blimey, not even a scratch. You weren't kidding about a protection spell. Carter got up from the ground and exclaimed in amazement, seeing that she wasn't hurt after a cliff fell on her. You're protected, but it won't last long against the attacks of the Infinity Stones, I explained. At that moment, I heard an energy explosion and saw one of the Ultrons being sent flying. Tony separated the Ultrons. Let's go, I said quickly and opened a portal. Exiting the portal, we saw the Ultron that had been sent flying getting up from the ground. Interesting. With so much power, it's usually easy to kill weaklings like you. Ultron looked at us, intrigued. Thor threw the hammer towards Ultron, and I quickly cast the images of Icon spell, turning the single hammer into hundreds. Ultron backed off while destroying and dodging the hammers, but there were too many, and he ended up getting hit many times. Who? Thor shouted, impressed at seeing hundreds of his beloved hammer doing that. We're up. Are you sure about this? Carter, as part of the plan, jumped on T'Cholla's back and asked. Of course not. T'Cholla said, amused, closed his Star-Lord mask, and with the ignition of rockets on his ankles, flew off with Carter. They tried to fly to Ultron's back. When they got close, Captain Carter shouted, "Here we go, now," and jumped off T'Cholla's back, flying towards Ultron while holding the shield in front of her body. I raised my hand and cast a spell that reinforced the shield. Boom! Carter hit Ultron directly in the face, leaving him stunned. She then hitched a ride on one of the hammers and returned to the ground. Ha! Carter laughed as she looked at Ultron. Ultron glared furiously at Carter but, due to this, didn't see T'Cholla coming from behind and embracing his neck. Gotcha! T'Cholla exclaimed. Get off! Ultron, irritated, grabbed T'Cholla by the face and threw him away. He then raised his hand and shot an energy blast at T'Cholla, who only survived because the mystical armor appeared and defended him. Carter ran after T'Cholla. I smiled because one of Ultron's stones was missing from his chest. T'Cholla had ripped the stone out when he hugged him. I then used a spell to guide images of Icon of Thor's hammer to all attack Ultron at the same time and arrest him, thus creating a ball of hammers surrounding him. Hey! Thor shouted and raised his hammer, sending a thick beam down upon Ultron surrounded by Mjolnirs, amplifying the attack. Shortly after, Carter and T'Cholla ran past and rejoined us. Go, go! I shouted for them to stay behind me, as Ultron had just destroyed all the hammers. I then summoned the heads of a three-headed dragon that I had merged with before and shot flames at Ultron. What? You've been hiding that the entire time? Thor asked me in astonishment as he saw the giant heads of a red dragon emerge from within my cloak. Well, this has been delightful, Ultron said with boredom, showing that he hadn't been taking us seriously all this time, but it's time for me to bring out some of my own toys. Then he activated the 6 Infinity Stones, or at least he tried to. My stone. You stole my soul stone, Ultron asked angrily when he noticed one stone was missing from his chest. Angry, he swung his spear and easily destroyed my dragon summon. Time to go, Carter said, slightly anxious, as she saw that he was now truly angry. Then, above Ultron's head, which was about to attack us, a giant portal opened. Was it you, Doctor? T'Cholla asked. No, I replied, slightly confused. Then I saw Ultron look up, puzzled, and open his mouth in shock. Before I could attempt to deduce what it was, I saw a giant golden foot emerge from the portal and step on Ultron, burying him in the ground. After that, I saw the rest of a huge golden robot coming out of the portal. The robot was the size of a large building, and it was missing a leg, image of enchanted giant iron armor. Then I saw the robot look at us. Missed me? Stark's arrogant voice sounded from the huge robot. Wow, Thor looked amazed. Incredible. Carter also murmured. I want one of those, T'Cholla said, impressed. Well, it was indeed impressive. The robot then severed the connection with its remaining leg holding Ultron and flew with its torso towards us. The remaining leg created a thruster at the top and began spinning like a drill, creating a hole in the ground and disappearing into its depths with Ultron. In the middle of the way, the robot's torso, which was flying towards us, shrank and transformed into small particles of dust before everything vanished into the body of a man in armor, whom I recognized as Stark. Let's go, that won't hold him for long, Stark said. A portal then appeared by our side. It was the Watcher who made it. Where is the Ancient One? I asked as we ran toward the portal. Here. A voice came from my side out of nowhere. I exclaimed, slightly startled, and conjured a defensive spell in my hand. Beside me, a woman in golden armor with a covered face appeared. I recognized that the Ancient One's voice came from her. Puff? Now I understand why Yao enjoys doing this to me so much, came Stark's amused voice from my side. I was surprised and asked, Yao is the Ancient One's name? And you two are really married? Yes and yes. We even have a son named Rocket, Stark said, amused. I stumbled upon hearing that and widened my eyes. The last thing I heard before entering the portal was Tony's amused laughter. Chapter 37, Golden Dragon. Tony P.O.V. We crossed the portal and appeared on the Earth of this universe. I looked around and saw only destruction. This world was killed by Ultron. Oh, you made it. Gamora looked at us and said. She knew, as the plan was to come to Earth only if we succeeded. You ready? Steven asked. The stone, Gamora requested, reaching out her hand. Peggy, who was holding the stone, threw it to Gamora. But in the middle of the way, it was intercepted by a beautiful yet dusty redhead on a motorcycle. The redhead revved and stopped shortly after, aiming a pistol at us. Everyone went on guard and was about to attack, as they didn't know her. Except for me, Yao, and Carter. No, wait. Stand down. Carter quickly stepped in front of everyone, asking them to calm down, and said, "She's Natasha Romanoff." "Who?" T'Challa asked, still aiming at Natasha. "Yeah, I'm also supposed to be the last person on this planet," Natasha said, looking at us emotionlessly. "We're from another universe." "Universes. We're here to stop Ultron," Carter said, but Natasha didn't believe it and pulled the safety of the pistol, ready to fire. "I can prove it. Your father is Yvonne. Your dad's Alexei. And you're the one woman I trust to have my 6, including now. There are 3 people you trust in the universe, and I count myself lucky enough to be one of them," Peggy said, approaching Natasha in a comforting manner. Natasha looked at her seriously, searching for lies. Finding none, she lifted her lips slightly. "Well, we must be close," Natasha said, amused, locking the gun and lowering it. "I believe the term is BFF," Peggy said, smiling at her. "Well, now that everything has been sorted out, it's time for the villain to show up, and I wasn't talking about Ultron." Disabling my camouflage, I appeared to everyone. "Hey, Nat," I said, looking at the redhead. Natasha looked at me with wide eyes and an open mouth. "Tony." She shouted my name, not believing it. "Well, that's me," I replied, amused. Bang 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 asterisk. She emptied the magazine into me. "Well, I won't say I didn't expect that. I was 100% expecting that. Tony is practically responsible for the destruction of this world by creating Ultron. Natasha is living a life worse than death solely because of him. She hasn't given up only because she's too strong for that and wants to kill Ultron before she dies. Even Barton, who was the last living person besides her, blew himself up with several Ultrons simply because he was too tired of living in this world. Proof of how Tony from this dimension messed everything up. I'm not your Tony, I'm from another universe, although I don't know if you're happy or sad about that," I said awkwardly, scratching my iron neck. "Hump." Natasha huffed and didn't speak to me anymore. "Ahem." Gamera coughed into her fist, trying to lighten the mood, and asked, "Could you hand us the stone? The Ultrons might arrive at any moment. Speaking of which, where are they? I took them on a trip to the center of that planet, but it shouldn't be long before they arrive," I explained. "Ultrons?" Natasha asked, confused. "Well, he went multiverse hopping to get himself a little boyfriend." I shrugged. "Crap." Natasha widened her eyes. "Yeah, crap." Carter also shook her head bitterly. Crash crash crash. The sound of something cracking resonated, and we saw a portal open up, from which 2 Ultrons emerged. "Tony, we appreciate the gift you gave us, so how about we return the favor?" one of the Ultrons said. Then the 2 separated and began using the stones to grow and grow, becoming larger than the buildings. "Yao, you help them, I'll deal with 1 Ultron alone," I said, looking at one of the giants. "Time to test something new," I murmured with a smile. "Let's go with Project Metamorph No 8. Then my body began to contort and change shape. My hands and feet transformed into claws, a tail sprouted from my coccyx, my face distorted, and my teeth sharpened, my armor morphing along the entire process. In the end, my body metamorphosed into a majestic wingless golden dragon with iron armor, the size of a regular human. "Huh? Is that it?" The Ultrons, who were expecting something incredible, were surprised and laughed. "Well, Tony, it's amazing and all, but I'm not sure if it helps much with that," Carter said, looking strangely at the small dragon while pointing at the giant Ultrons bigger than buildings. "Oh, is that so?" I looked at Carter, playfully showing my fangs. "Time to grow," I said, and the hidden Pym particles in my body went into action. My body started to grow, and I turned into a giant golden dragon the size of Ultron. Image of the enchanted armor dragon. "Okay, now, this is incredible," Carter said, amazed. "My Tony doesn't do that," Natasha said, impressed. "I don't think any other Tony does." Strange also looked astonished. "Let's dance," I said with a fierce smile on my gigantic tooth-filled mouth. "Roar!" I roared and pounced on one of the Ultrons, biting its head and throwing it far away. Its helmet ended up in my mouth, and I crushed it with my teeth. Spitting it out, I leaped onto a building and propelled myself upwards. From my back, thrusters emerged, propelling me towards Ultron. Ultron stood up and swung his lance, which I dodged, then swiped my claw at his arm, tearing it off. Arg! Ultron growled at me and used the stones to grow his arm back. Without wasting time, I opened my mouth, quickly charging a blast of energy and shooting it at Ultron. Ultron regenerated his arm and, with little time to counter, used the energy from the Mind Stone in his forehead to deflect my blow. There was an explosion and we were both sent flying. I got up and shook my head, getting rid of the debris. I looked around for Ultron, but I didn't see him. Then a beam of energy came out of nowhere, aiming for my neck. With agility and experience, I rolled to the side, getting my neck out of the way. It wouldn't kill me due to the protections and my own energy, but it would hurt. Quickly finding my target, I decided to get more serious. It might be a little draining, but it's fine, I thought. Then my gigantic draconic body began to glow with energy. It was my powers that I replicated from Carol circulating in my body. I lunged at Ultron and started beating him relentlessly. I tore off all his limbs, including his head, and then tried to remove the stones, but the stones in his body glowed, and his body returned to normal. Enough. He then crossed his arms in front of his chest, glowing with energy, and before I could do anything, he released a massive beam of energy in my direction. I couldn't dodge it completely, and my left arm, along with all its protections, was destroyed. Strange was too far to reinforce the spell, so it wasn't as powerful as it would normally be. I quickly shrank my form and turned back into a human out of fear of a counterattack from the shadows when I was too big and disoriented. My lost arm quickly regenerated along with a new armor. I looked at Ultron, who had also shrunk to his normal form and was looking at me. "You're the most powerful Tony Stark I've ever seen," Ultron said as he floated towards me, without a scratch, but I saw signs of wear and burns where the stones rested on his chest, which quickly healed with the glow of the stones, evidence that it was Ultron healing himself. It seems that the last attack he performed wasn't that easy for him either. I also flew a few meters off the ground, and we faced each other as we circled each other in flight. "Is that so? And how many Tony Starks have you known?" I asked, intrigued. "I've killed 2 Tony Starks, which brings my total to 2, excluding you," Ultron said in an amused manner. "So you're the original Ultron from this dimension. It seems that in addition to taking other Ultron, you also destroyed his reality," I affirmed, surprised. "Well, since we would have to clean it up anyway, why not take advantage, since we were there?" Ultron shrugged. I narrowed my eyes at him. This bastard killed more than one universe. Boom! Suddenly there was an explosion that caught us off guard. A huge and extremely powerful explosion that seemed to have engulfed the entire planet and beyond. But as we were being hit by the explosion, it regressed, and everything returned to how it was before it. I narrowed my eyes. This explosion reminded me of something. I remembered that my team has a very powerful member. Strange. Chapter 38, The Final Showdown. The battle ends in this chapter, so the lengths of the next chapters return to normal. Don't be sad, I'll die if I keep writing such long chapters. Yaup.o.v. Tony took one of the Ultrons away, leaving us to face the other one. Ultron at this moment was larger than a building. We can't let him continue at this size, or we won't be able to defeat him. I stomped on the ground and threw us into the dimension of mirrors. "What place is this?" Ultron looked confused at the mirror dimension. "This place won't hold the stone bearer, so I have to be quick." I manipulated the buildings to fall on Ultron to get his attention. Strange took advantage of his distraction to manipulate the ground beneath his feet, creating a wave in the asphalt, causing him to fall, and began firing energy blasts at Ultron, drawing his attention as he circled him. I then manipulated reality to fold in on itself, creating a mirrored city above the city. "Steven, now," I said, and he took everyone out of the mirrored world, leaving me alone with Ultron. "Enjoy," I said and manipulated the mirrored world for gravity to affect the city above, and fled the mirror dimension. The last thing I saw was the mirrored city in the sky falling on top of Ultron. Shortly after we left, a giant portal appeared, breaking the fabric of space, and from it, Ultron emerged, covered in scratches and without his helmet. The stones then glowed, and his body returned to normal. He gritted his teeth at us and released a large beam of energy that hit us. Steven and I reinforced everyone's shields and managed to emerge unscathed. I can destroy galaxies with a thought. Ultron completely lost his patience and hunched over with his arms crossed, with bursts of energy coursing through his body. Feeling the amount of energy, I prepared to do something, but it was just a precaution, as it wasn't me who would deal with it. "Why won't you die?" Ultron shouted and released the energy. Boom! A massive explosion erupted. The explosion was so huge that it engulfed the entire galaxy. Then, as if time reversed, all the energy from the explosion returned and compressed into Strange's palm. He then placed the explosion into his mouth and swallowed it. His eyes blazed with energy. "Wait, what?" Ultron was confused and shocked. But how could he understand? I didn't even understand how Strange did that. If he had time to prepare, that would be fine, but it was instantaneous. I imagine it must be the talent of some demon he devoured. Strange looked with blazing eyes at Ultron and smiled. Hey! Strange then roared, and his body contorted. I saw shadows of various monsters emerging from him. I could only shake my head at what love can do to a man. To gain greater power to save his beloved from death, he swallowed thousands of demons to steal their powers. H. Steven then shouted, and dozens of gigantic tentacles emerged from his body. He even absorbed Shumagaratha's tentacles. He had really gone mad, I thought, looking at the spectacle. The thousands of tentacles restrained the giant Ultron and crushed him to the ground. Boom! Dust and smoke rose from the impact, and we heard an arg, which was Ultron's cry of pain. Vejas. That was Thor's cry as he launched a lightning bolt at the fallen Ultron. Steven cast magical blasts to hold him in place. I summoned chains on Ultron's limbs, which the other guardians of the multiverse pulled and restrained him. Natasha quickly handed over the Soul Stone she was holding to Gamera, who placed the Soul Stone in the Infinity Crusher. With the energy from the Soul Stone, the Infinity Crusher was able to move like a spider toward the immobilized Ultron and began synchronizing the stones before destroying them. Time, space, mind, power, reality, and lastly, it synced with the soul. Boom! Another explosion erupted due to the destruction of the stones. We were all sent flying a few meters by the blast. We got up and looked around. Is that it? Is it over? We win? Yeah, not so hard, Thor said, perplexed and happy. It doesn't feel over. T'Challa shook his head with a sense of foreboding. Then a voice echoed from everywhere. I'm honestly surprised. Didn't the Watcher warn you? Every universe is different, each one just a fraction unique. Thus the Infinity Stones are unique. Ultron's voice came, explaining and mocking us. Of course. The Crusher was designed to destroy the stones on my world, not his. Gamera was enlightened and said helplessly to all of us. Ultron emerged from the midst of the flames from where we thought we had destroyed him. All 6 stones were gathered in his body. He then casually struck using the energy of the 6 stones. Brace yourselves. Carter shouted. Boom. The energy beam cut through everything in its path, including the buildings and the street. Fortunately, we remained unscathed under the protection of the spells. Ultron noticed this and traced the source. It's you? If I destroy you, you all fall. Ultron said, looking at Steven, who was the origin of the largest energy signature in defense. Well, I can also provide the protection, but it doesn't make sense to warn the enemy. Ultron extended his hand, targeting Steven, and generated an explosion at our location. Boom! The explosion sent some of us flying. I had my eye on one in particular. Natasha. Natasha, who was sent flying near her motorcycle, saw an arrow with a tip with green circuits lying on the ground. I smiled slightly. While Ultron was focused on Steven, I opened a portal and appeared near the motorcycle Natasha was running toward. Squatting and picking up the arrow, I looked at Natasha, who looked at me cautiously. Please, give me the arrow. It's our only hope. Natasha looked at me firmly. I know, this arrow carries a potent virus, but that's not the Ultron you should shoot, but the one Tony is facing. I said with a smile, extending the arrow to Natasha. No, we only have one arrow, we have to shoot the Ultron that has the complete set of those magic crystals. Natasha shook her head, firm in her decision. Just trust me, I have protected the Earth for 1,000 years at the cost of my life. This is the best decision, the best way. I removed my mask and showed my old face to her, looking at her with seriousness and confidence. Natasha looked into my eyes for a few seconds. She then clenched her fist tightly and continued to stare at me, but there was no hesitation or doubt in my eyes. Sigh, I hope I'm not making the wrong decision. Natasha sighed and nodded, then continued, I need him to be distracted and unreactive. I also need a clear path to his eyes. It's the only place where I can attach the arrow and allow the invasion without him being able to react. Tony will provide, just go. I said with a slight smile and then opened a portal for Natasha, who quickly stepped inside. I looked at the battlefield, smiled, and said to myself aloud, this battle is about to end. Tony P.O.V. I continued to fight against Ultron, but I changed my strategy. I could never defeat him if he started using the energy of the stones while damaging his body. And that's what he's doing. So I started trying to steal other stones, but his guard was too high, and I would end up getting badly hurt if I tried. It was annoying how I could hit him, but he instantly rebuilds himself with the stones. In the middle of the fight, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a portal open and Natasha emerge with a green arrow in her hand, and behind her, within the portal, I saw Yao waving at me with a smile. I almost laughed out loud at that, but I held back to avoid drawing Ultron's attention. Ultron is without his helmet because I tore it off when the battle began, so his eyes are unprotected. Now I just need to hold him while Nat shoots. While Ultron shoots energy blasts at me, I crossed my hands and quickly created images of icon of myself. With hundreds of clones, I surrounded Ultron and restrained him with hundreds of crimson bands of Sidorak, and through the crimson bands, thousands of nanobots climbed and held Ultron even more firmly. And while Ultron was distracted with me, he didn't see Natasha amidst my clones firing an arrow toward his eye. The arrow with the green tip, while in the air, changed to the color yellow. Natasha, who saw that, widened her eyes. Ultron, when he saw the arrow, was already close to his eye. He tried to resist, but it was too late. The arrow shattered his eye and went in with the tip. Seeing that, I removed the restraints with a smile. Arg. Ultron quickly ripped the arrow from his eye and threw it away. The stones in his body glowed, and his eye returned to normal. Ultron looked around feeling strange. Removing all traces of the Ultron entity, a female voice emerged from Ultron's body. Who's there? Who said that? Ultron asked anxiously. Hello, my name is Friday. I am an AI created by Mr. Stark. The friendly voice came again. This body is occupied, Ultron said angrily. Sorry, but you have caused too much harm, which goes against the boss's objectives. Goodbye, Friday's voice said, and then Ultron's body fell from the sky to the ground as if it had lost its energy. We did it, Natasha put her hand to her mouth and said, shocked. She finally defeated Ultron. No, wait, he's getting up. Natasha said bitterly as she positioned herself for a fight. Good job, here, it's missing this. I ignored Nat and smiled at the adversary. I then threw the soul stone that I had been carrying the whole time to him. No, Tony, what did you do? Natasha widened her eyes and looked at me incredulously and angrily, but she froze with what she heard next. Please do not worry, ma'am. Ultron has been defeated. A female voice emerged from the former Ultron, which shocked Nat. This is Friday, she won't hurt anyone, I said, smiling. Friday had already been created, but normally, she is just an assistant to Jarvis. She usually assists us when the girls and I are having sex or in private because since I built Jarvis as a man, I didn't want him to have information about my nighttime activities with the girls. But apart from those moments, I didn't use Friday, as at work, I created Jarvis to be a better assistant for me. The girls usually use her more, especially Pepper at work. Nat looked at me suspiciously. She didn't trust any Tony Stark with his craziness. Look, I am different. I didn't do this just because I thought it would work. No, my wife Yao looked into the future to make sure, otherwise, she wouldn't let me do this. I explained helplessly to her. Natasha reduced the intensity of her gaze, but not completely. Boss, can I reshape my body? Friday, seeing that the conversation wasn't going to continue, asked as the last stone fit into her body. Yes, of course. I said, already feeling strange hearing a delicate voice from Ultron's body. Friday agreed and activated the stones. Her male body changed to a female one, Ultron's armor dissolved, and a dress took its place, and the infinity stones that were on her torso became a necklace around her neck. Image and doubt. Let's go, the fight is not over yet, I said to them. They nodded, and I opened a portal. Arriving there, I saw everyone lying on the ground except Yao and Strange, who were fighting Ultron. Friday, take advantage while he's distracted. I whispered to her. Friday agreed and quickly flew to Ultron in his blind spot. Getting close to him, she quickly condensed the energy of the stones in her hands. Ultron widened his eyes, as he felt the immense amount of energy being gathered on his back, but it was already too late. Friday placed her hands on Ultron's head and invaded his mind with a shock. And it wasn't just any shock, because unlike Ultron, Friday knew magic, as I updated her and Jarvis with magic, so that was a more refined use of the Infinity Stones than Ultron could normally manage. So that channeling was enough to burn Ultron's consciousness. There was an explosion that threw everyone away. Ultron remained standing at the origin of the explosion, looking at us. Carter barely got up, and when she saw Ultron, she spoke bitterly, he's still alive. No, he's dead. Friday's voice sounded, awakening everyone from their stupor. When she said that, Ultron's body fell to the ground. Who is our friend? Gamera also rose from the debris and asked, looking at Friday, but more specifically at the Infinity Stones on her body. Hello, I'm Friday. Don't worry, I'm a friend. Friday said cheerfully. Unlike the original, I made Friday a lively and friendly little girl. My house already has enough serious people. And where did you come from? Steven asked, confused. But it was Natasha who responded. Tony and that woman tricked me. I was going to put the mother of all viruses into Ultron's body through an arrow to destroy him, but if I'm not mistaken, when that woman grabbed the arrow, she somehow replaced the virus with that Friday, which ended up taking over Ultron's body. Natasha explained the intricacies of the matter. Everyone looked surprised at us. Well, it's better than what you were going to do. Your so-called mother of all viruses was just Armin Zola's AI codes. He tricked you, there was no virus, he just wanted Ultron's body. I explained. Natasha tilted her head and shrugged. I figured something could go wrong, but I didn't have many options. Nat said, not caring, with a smile on the corner of her mouth. I could only shake my head ironically. While we were talking, I saw Killmonger approaching Ultron's body with an Ultron Sentinel head in his hand. Chapter 39, Wrong Direction. The chapters are back to their normal size. As we were talking, I saw Killmonger approaching Ultron's body with an Ultron Sentinel head in his hand. A smile spread across my lips. Killmonger then used the Sentinel head to manipulate Ultron's body and steal the suit and the stones. Like nanoparticles, the suit decomposed from Ultron's body and merged into Killmonger's body along with the Sentinel head. He then turned around with the Infinity Armor and opened his arms to all of us, displaying the stones on his chest. Everyone got into battle position against him, except for me, Yao, and Friday. Cousin, what are you doing? T'Challa, tired and wounded, still asked firmly of Killmonger. The Watcher owes us this. With these stones, we could fix our worlds, our lives. Killmonger said, trying to tempt us. He then looked at a few specifically and tried to entice them. T'Challa, Thor, are you gonna turn down the one thing guaranteed to save your homes? Peggy, you can be with your fella again. Strange, you more than anyone know that this is it. This is our only chance. Killmonger said with a confident and warm smile, disguising his thirst for destruction and vengeance against the world with a kind facade. There was a brief pensive silence. Hand over the stones, cousin. T'Challa didn't fall for it and demanded. Everyone maintained their battle stances against him. I'm not your cousin. Killmonger smiled, then grimaced, and said, I'm sorry it has to end this way. He then attempted to manipulate the stones to destroy us. Well, attempted is the keyword. Huh. Everyone who prepared to defend themselves from the attack looked at each other in surprise. Huh? Yug. Killmonger was grimacing and groaning as he tried to use the stones. Sorry, but what you're trying to do is impossible. A chivalrous voice said out of nowhere, speaking to Killmonger. Huh? Who said that? And why? Killmonger looked around and asked. It was me. A hand tapped Killmonger's shoulder. Everyone was startled and grabbed their weapons, more concerned about the man behind Killmonger than the man himself. Ultron? How are you alive? Killmonger was startled and stepped back. Excuse me, my name is Jarvis, an AI created by Mr. Stark. I'm not Ultron. And about you not being able to use the stones, it's my fault. The Sentinel head you used to take control was actually under my control. From it, I invaded both the armor you're wearing and Ultron itself. Jarvis explained politely. When Thor placed the Sentinel head on the counter Jarvis is my artificial intelligence, so I gave him a body. With Killmonger, I know the things he did, so Jarvis is currently manipulating his mind to allow his body to make a wish that I want with the stones, and speaking of that, I stopped and thought. Jarvis, actually, your name will be Vision now. You switch the stones with the ones Friday is using. We'll use the stones from this universe for this wish and avoid an incursion. I said, remembering that the Ultron of this universe was the one I killed. Yes. They both AI agreed. Alright, stop now. T'Challa interrupted us angrily, and said firmly, from what you said, something really bad is going to happen to the body of whoever wishes, so you're complicating the process by using my cousin's body. I can't let you do this. Even if he killed the alternative version of me, you, your father, your mother, thousands of Wakandans, and others. I asked, amused. He what? T'Challa stammered in disbelief. I don't kill innocents, but I have no mercy for villains. I said, looking at him seriously. T'Challa clenched his fists and looked down, but then he raised his head and looked at me. Still, he has to be judged by the laws of Waka he was saying, but he was knocked out. I looked at Yao, who appeared behind T'Challa amused. You? What's gotten into you? Strange looked incredulously at Yao. Yao looked seriously at Strange and said, Steven, understand, this is all for the greater good. Giving an impotent facepalm, I spoke to Yao, love, you have to ease up on the Harry Potter. Yao just smiled at me, amused. She likes HP so much that she used the time stone to read future books. Well, enough of the delay. Vision, is everything ready? I asked, looking at Vision. Yes, sir. At your command. But the Mind Stone still needs to be detached from this body. Vision nodded and said, well, I was already prepared for that. With my technology and magic, it won't take long to be able to remove the stone without influencing the body. I said and went to do it. No one else was trying to stop me. From the things I said, they knew what I was doing. Natasha was the one looking at me with the most hope in her eyes. 10 minutes later, the Mind Stone was detached, and a magical arc reactor that I had recently created was on Vision's forehead, providing energy to the body. Alright, disguise your appearance before doing this, we don't want people cursing their savior. I said playfully. Doing as I said, Vision and Friday looked human now. Vision then manipulated Killmonger to raise his hand and snap his fingers. Snap. The entire universe seemed to pause for a moment. Everything was still, only our thoughts circulated. Then everything started spinning again, and as if time were reversing, things began to return. Like dust carried by the wind and merged into mud, the destroyed buildings around us returned to their glory. The dark sky returned to shine. We heard birds singing and soon came the sounds of people. Like a set of dust, people began to gather and take shape. My God, I'm alive? How? Was that a nightmare? No, I'm sure I died. You all died? I lived for a while after that. It was Ultron who killed us. Ultron? What's that? It's a killer robot that came out of nowhere. These and more similar conversations were happening everywhere. The street we were on was full of people looking at us curiously and taking pictures of us, as we stood out. At that moment, I was looking at Killmonger, who began to turn into dust. It seems that being at death's door, his mind received clarity again. He looked ahead, where the people taking pictures of us were all white, and gave a sarcastic smile. All this for them? For those who have always oppressed my brothers and sisters? Those same ones who denied and abandoned us? What a waste. Were his last words before his body dissolved into dust. I looked at that and shook my head. You were just looking in the wrong direction. I said softly and looked back, where several young black people were mixed in the crowd taking pictures of us and talking. Chapter 40, A Place to Belong. I then turned my gaze to where Eric Killmonger had died. It seems that the damage Ultron caused was so great that it became fatal for a human, even one enhanced like the Black Panther, to survive after wishing for the repair. Even his body transformed into nothing. The unsupported stones had fallen to the ground, but I quickly gathered them with magic and stowed them away. Thank you. A wild Natasha jumped on me and hugged my neck tightly. I was slightly surprised, but I embraced her waist with a gentle smile and caressed her back. She was a bit stinky, but who could blame her? You can't have so much luxury in a destroyed world. I then whispered softly in her ear in a warm tone, you've suffered enough. It's time for you to be happy. Natasha's seems to be cursed. Across the universe, it seems they can't have a happy ending. But I'll give her a happy ending, both her from this universe and her from mine. We pulled away from the hug, and Natasha smiled at me while wiping her tears. That was when her earpiece received a call, and she cried even more when she saw it was Clint calling. She then went to the side to talk. T'Challa also woke up at that moment, and seeing all the life that returned to this universe, he understood that Killmonger had died. But after sighing bitterly, he didn't insist on the matter. I looked at everyone who was looking at me and smiled. We still have to fix the other Ultron's world that was completely destroyed and Steven's world that was also completely destroyed. I said with a smile. And what about Killmonger's world? He messed things up there a lot. Carter asked. I don't know. Interfering in other universes like this may not be a good thing. Universes destroyed and without hope are one thing, those full of life and with their own destiny are another. I said, shaking my head. I can't keep taking care of other universes. But saving some destroyed ones occasionally is not a problem. I agree. Uatu appeared beside us and took us away from there, as there were many people taking pictures of us and surrounding us. I can take you to save destroyed universes, but I can't guide you to universes with life, as it goes against my oath. Uatu explained. Well, that's enough. Let me get something before we restore the other Ultron's universe, I said and had Uatu take me home. Soon, I returned holding one of the High Evolutionary's henchmen that I had in my prison. You know what to do, I said and threw him to Friday. She nodded and entered a portal that Uatu opened. Shortly after, she returned with the stones in her hand and handed them to me. Everything's taken care of. Friday took care of that universe. Now only Strange's remains, I said, looking at him. But he just shook his head negatively. Sigh, my universe can't be fixed. Steven said with a bitter sigh. Let us see, I said to him. He sighed again and nodded. Uatu then opened a portal. We entered and appeared inside a giant purple crystal. That was Steven's entire universe now. A large purple crystal. This is complicated, Yao said while studying the dimension and casting some spells. He broke an absolute point in time. His Christine died instead of him losing his hands, so he sought answers in the mystical arts, and then he became the Sorcerer Supreme and tried to save Christine by going back in time. But if he saves her, he has no motivation to become the Sorcerer Supreme, and if he isn't the Sorcerer Supreme, he can't save Christine, creating a paradox he can't escape. That's the absolute point in time, and Steven foolishly broke it, bringing the end of his universe. I recalled the intricacies of the matter. While I was thinking, Stephen explained the same thing to everyone. Sigh, this situation could only be fixed using the Infinity Stones from my universe, but all of them were destroyed, except for this one, Steven said, opening the Eye of Agamotto, revealing the Time Stone. What about the stones that are with Tony? Carter asked with a frown. No, Uatu said firmly, explaining, using the energy of one universe in sufficient quantities to fix another entire universe would start an incursion between the two universes and lead to their certain destructions. Carter then remembered what we had discussed before and was a bit embarrassed to have proposed that. We can't use the stones, but it doesn't mean we can't study them. Doctor Strange, I want to invite you to my universe while I study the stones and find a solution. I have theories that may help with your problems. And in the meantime, we would like you to be our Sorcerer Supreme. Yao is tired of the position, I said to Strange solemnly, and then with amusement. Strange widened his eyes at us. Why you would do that for me? After all the wrong I've done, you would trust me. Strange stammered, surprised, and moved. You're not bad, Steven. More like misguided, Yao said playfully. But this shocked Strange. They were the same words his Ancient One had said to him before about himself. Strange then nodded to me and Yao with a gentle smile, accepting our invitation. After that, we returned to the pub where we had met in the beginning. Uatu turned to us. The entire multiverse owes you a debt of gratitude. But your worlds will never know this victory. Once you walk through that door, you'll return to the exact moment you left. Uatu said. We bid each other farewell and began to return to our universes with nostalgia and a sense of accomplishment. Omniscient P.O.V. Everyone was leaving through the door, and when only Carter and Natasha remained, Peggy stopped at the door. She looked to the side and saw the portrait of the scrawny Steve Rogers. It's time to go, Captain. You'd rather return to another time, Uatu said, knowing what she was thinking. Just as Steve Rogers lost his Peggy when he was frozen for 70 years. This Peggy also lost 70 years of the world before seeing the light of day again, but there wasn't a Steve waiting for her on the other side. Haven't I earned my happy ending? She asked with a sad and lonely tone. Trust me, that world, that time, needs Captain Carter. Uatu said, looking at her with helplessness, but there was also confidence in his eyes. Carter hesitated, then looked at Natasha, who was waiting for her to leave so she could return to her world. Carter remembered Nat's world, a world where his Avengers lost. She had a duty, and much would be at stake if she didn't fulfill it. She nodded to the two and entered the portal. Natasha followed, leaving only Uatu behind. Uatu sighed softly, then returned to his duty, to watch. He saw Peggy, who walked out the door and found Steve, who had been frozen in time inside a suit on the ship where she was before being caught to fight Ultron. Uatu then looked at a happy Natasha reuniting with the revived Avengers and trying to stop them from beating up Tony. Again, as he already had purple eyes. That's it, isn't it? Uatu said as he looked through the multiverse. There, he saw T'Challa fighting alongside the newly recruited Peter Quill with smiles on their faces. All creatures, searching for a place to belong. Uatu then looked at Gamora. There, he saw Gamora talking to a Tony Stark in a large suit with a smile. To call home. He saw Thor embracing Jane Foster with a big smile. As for me, I am the Watcher. He then saw Tony's house, filled with laughter and fun. Tony was explaining who Vision, Friday, and Strange were, all sitting in the living room with smiles. Everyone burst into laughter at seeing Steven faint at the sight of Yao's real appearance. He then looked at you reading this story and said with solemnity and sincerity, the multiverse, every single world, every story is my home, and I will protect it to the end.